Ready? Okay. Oh, wow. Hello and welcome. My name is Paloma López, and I am the Education Manager at the Indian Arts Research Center here at SAR. Thank you all for coming tonight, and thank you to those of you watching at home for tuning in this evening. I would like to begin by acknowledging that the School for Advanced Research is situated on traditional Tewa lands, Ogopogo Winge or White Shell Water Place, and that our campus is surrounded by the landscapes of Pueblo, Apache, and Dene communities, all of whom maintain strong ties to this land. This evening, we are gathered to celebrate our 2023 Rollin and Mariella King Native Artist Fellow, Michael Namingha. It has been a real honor and pleasure to get to know Michael over the course of his time here at SAR. Whether it be showing up to an IARC volunteer meeting to speak to our docents, or filming a reel for social media with our awesome interns, while on campus, Michael has been incredibly generous with his time and knowledge. I, for one, will miss visiting the vaults with him, watching him take in his family's work and pointing out elements of the designs I've never noticed before. I learned so much just by being in the same space with you, Michael, so thank you so much for that. And I know that I'm not alone in saying that you will be sorely missed when you leave here. For those of you unfamiliar with Michael Namingha and his work, Michael is a versatile photographer of Hopi and Puebloan descent who combines new and old techniques to create abstracted compositions that serve as a commentary on the rapidly changing landscape of the American West. He often incorporates color psychology and skewed perspectives into his works to convey a larger message about environmental issues. During his time at SAR, Michael has taken advantage of the IARC collection to study pottery made by members of his family dating back to Nampeo. His ever-evolving project will progress beyond his fellowship as he continues to learn more about his family's artistic practices, discover connections that span generations, and carry elements of his family's work forward with him as his own practice evolves. Michael's work can be found in museum collections across the country, and he has participated in exhibitions around the world. There are literally too many for me to list. We will be here all night. After Michael's presentation, there will be a brief Q&A, and for those of you watching remotely, we do have someone monitoring the chat, so please feel free to ask your questions there, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. And lastly, I just wanted to remind everyone here in person that after the talk, there will be an open studio and light refreshments at the Dubin Studio, so please stick around for that, and a chance to see some examples of Michael's work. So now, without further ado, I will turn things over to Michael Namingha.
Thank you, Paloma, and thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. I just want to start off with a few thank yous. I'd like to thank the School for Advanced Research and the IARC staff, particularly Paloma López, Rachel Morris, Daniel Kern for supporting me during my time here, and every 2 weeks I would spend time in the vaults, and they were so accommodating to me. I also want to thank Emily Navratil at the Vilcek Foundation, Patricia Norby at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Carolyn Kastner, my family, for the support that they've been providing, and of course my partner David. So I will start off my presentation for those that are not work, kind of what got me here. So it took me a while as an artist to kind of figure out my stride and where I was comfortable and what my purpose was. So I've gone through a few iterations, but it didn't really come to my grip until 2014. So I knew I wanted to be a photographer. I just wasn't sure what kind of photographer. So in 2014, I was driving home. I used to live at Quail Run. I was probably the youngest resident in their history. People used to joke, they're like, why do you want to live at a retirement home? I'm like, it's quiet. That was more branding, Peter. So I was driving home to Quail Run, which is on the south side of town. And there was sort of like this approaching storm, and it was a beautiful gray sky, and the sun was kind of filtering through. And I thought, I'm going to try to capture a sunset, so I'm going to drive out to Galisteo because that was kind of the closest area with the largest kind of open expanse of space. And so I drove out there, got out of my car, kind of looking toward where Tom Ford's old ranch was, and it was so picturesque and it was beautiful, and forgot to start my timer. So I captured this shot, but on my way out there and on my way back home, I saw all of these signs along the side of the road that said, "No drilling in Galisteo, no oil in Lamy." And I thought, I wonder what that's about. So when I got home, I started to go through all of my photographs that I had taken. And then I started to research the Galisteo area, Galisteo Basin. And what popped up first was oil companies that had wanted to move in and do oil and natural gas extraction in that area and region. And I discovered that a lot of the residents of the town of Galisteo were fighting it. And so I really started to think about my experience growing up in New Mexico and being part of this landscape and experiencing this landscape and being out in it, and also my cultural heritage and how we are so tied to this land and respect this land and stewards of this land. My father is Hopi from the Hopi tribe in Arizona, and my mother is from Okeowinga. And so I grew up with those values. And when I went to school at Parsons School of Design in New York City, and I've been living there off and on since college. But one thing about living in New York is you really start to an environment it is, and I longed for what I grew up with. And so when I came home, I started also to realize just how quickly this landscape that I was surrounded by had begun to change. And so this image you're seeing here is a photo of the Galisteo Basin, but that block of color represents a piece of the landscape that may not be there someday. And I really started to look at color psychology and what different colors, how they affect people. So green is a color of calm. There's another version of this photograph that has pink. And you'll notice pink kind of appears in a lot of my work following this. But when I was researching color psychology, I also read that pink is often a color that they'll paint the interior of a drunk tank with because it calms the people down. And also opposing, like football teams, they'll paint the opposing team's locker room pink so that it'll bring their level down. So then I started to experiment with shaped photography. I was a little bored or frustrated with photography being in a square or a rectangle format. And so I was looking at Ellsworth Kelly's work. I was looking at Ronald Davis' work, but also spending a lot of time in New York and also having the Santa Fe Opera in our backyard. In New York, I would go to the Met Opera quite a bit. And so I started to observe how set designers skew a set to trick the eye. And I started to think, how can I take that approach and apply it to photography? And so that's where my kind of engagement with shaped photographs began. And so this, again, is the Galisteo Basin, but it represents the first kind of foray into my shaped images. This is an image from my Black Place series, which I worked with Carolyn Kastner on for an exhibition at the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum in 2018. And the museum has, I don't know if they still do, a program called Contemporary Voices, where they invite living artists to create a body of work in response to O'Keeffe's work. And I had always been drawn to a series of O'Keeffe's paintings that she called The Black Place, that when I first saw them, I didn't know they were of a landscape. I thought they were, the first image I saw was, two clouds and lightning coming down the middle, and Carolyn said, no, that's a landscape in New Mexico. And I said, great, where is this place? And she said, well, it's in the Four Corners region. And I started to do research on it, and I said, okay, I want to try to tackle this series. So it began in 1930, and she finished, I guess, her work on it in 1940, so it was about a 10-year span. And when she began the series, it was very much a landscape. You could see you could tell what you were looking at. But as she progressed through the series, they became more and more abstract. And so I was really drawn to the abstract compositions. And so the piece that you're looking at is a reflection on that. And also, when I was researching the area where the Black Place is located, it's in the Four Corners region, not far from Chaco Canyon, not far from Farmington, New Mexico. And I used Google Earth to observe just where the location is, how large of an area it is. And I was drawn to the aerial perspective of Google Earth. So rather than hire an airplane or a helicopter to fly me over, drones were kind of becoming the new thing. So I bought a drone, and I used the drone to photograph that landscape. And when we finally made the trip out to photograph, I realized just how fragile a landscape it is. And so a drone allowed me to get up close and personal without actually having to leave my mark on it. But also in doing research of the area, I discovered what looked like a bunch of parking lots looking at Google Earth of that space. And I thought, that's so odd. So I would zoom in, and it seemed that way. And then I asked Carolyn, I said, why are there all these parking lots out there? And she said, well, those aren't parking lots. Those are oil drilling pads. And I said, oh, wow, okay. So I discovered that oil and natural gas had been infiltrating that landscape as well. And in 2014, NASA discovered the largest methane gas cloud in North America sits over that region. And it showed up on their satellite images as red, pink, and yellow. And so methane is odorless, colorless, you can't see it, but it can be detected using infrared technology. And so in this composition, I chose the color red to represent that methane gas cloud. Moving on to, I was in a residency program in New York City at the new museum called New Ink. And I was having a hard time while I was there because I was, as an artist, documenting the Western landscape, but living in New York City, there was such a disconnect. And I was trying to figure out a way to create a body of work being away from New Mexico. And so there's this phenomena that happens in June, and it's called Manhattanhenge. And it's when the sun sets during or around the time of the summer solstice, and the sun lines up perfectly between the buildings of like 34th Street, 23rd Street, 14th Street. And so this image that you're looking at is that. However, it was a really crazy, intense sunset. I mean, you can see people have literally stopped and are taking photographs of it. And whenever that happens in New York City, you're like, what is going on? So the next day at New Ink, we were talking about it. And what it was there were large forest fires in Canada. And the smoke had filtered down into New York City and created this sunset. And so I found my purpose of being at New Ink and moved into my Altered Landscape series. Being from the West, I am so used to, we are all used to our annual fire season. It seems like every June we are ready or prepared for the amount of smoke that filters through and creates these otherworldly sunsets. And in New York City, they're not used to it yet. So whenever it occurs, it's like this shocking thing for them. And so this body of work documents most of that, and then it moved on to other this is a photograph that was taken in 2022 of the largest forest fire in New Mexico history. It burned 348,000 acres. And this is a photo of a pyrocumulonimbus cloud. It's a cloud that is created by the intensity of a forest fire. And during the period of that forest fire, which began in April and wasn't contained until August, these clouds would appear in this blue sky every few weeks. And so that kind of gives you a history, I hope, of some of my art practice and how I got into this fellowship. So there's an exhibition called Grounded in Clay that opened at the Museum of Indian Arts and Culture last year. And it is a collaboration between the School for Advanced Research, the Vilcek Foundation, IARC, and it's currently on view at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York until June of next year. So I was invited to participate as one of the 60 curators in that exhibition, along with my brother and my father. And so we were invited to select a piece of pottery from either the Vilcek Foundation's collection or from the collection at IARC. And I was surprised at the amount of pottery pieces by the Namingha family that IARC has. And so narrowing it down to one piece by my grandmother, Dextra, which you see here in front of you, it's actually pretty small. It's about the length of a pen. It's made up of a bunch of painted pottery shards. And there are different connections for this piece for me. First off, I was just taken by the scale of the work and its complexity. But also looking at the jagged shapes of the pottery shards also reminded me of my own work and the jagged shapes that I use in my photographic work. But then I also started to think about Namingha and looking back at her looking at pottery shards that she would gather at the ancient village site of Sikyatki, it sort of brought a lot of different forms full circle related to my work, my grandmother's work, and Namingha's work. And so I really wanted to explore that a little further. During the Grounded in Clay process, we were talking about creating a coloring book, and I think it was Marita Hines who had suggested it. And so different curators from the exhibition, because we're all more or less artists, Rose Simpson was another of the artists that submitted coloring pages for the book. This is the coloring page that I did, but it had sort of like this unintended surprise for me because I ended up sort of tracing my grandmother's pottery design. But in a sense, that's what led me to following in her footsteps in a way that I wasn't intending and was really surprised by. So I want to read my essay that I wrote for the exhibition. Each piece that was selected for the exhibition was accompanied by an essay by one of the curators. And so this is what I wrote about my piece. It's titled Saya, which means grandmother in Hopi. When I first encountered this piece, I knew it had to be by my grandmother, Dextra. I remember seeing a much larger version of it on the cover of a book. I was initially drawn to the painted fragments of pottery, which are pieced together like a very complicated collage. Each little painted shard tells a story through symbolism. It made me think of my great-great-great-grandmother, Nampeo, who assembled fragments of pottery from the ancient village of Sikyatki to apply to her own pottery designs. To me, it seems that my grandmother is pictorially telling that story, but also telling the story of our culture. I have questions about this piece that I would like to ask my grandmother. Where did she get her clay from? What did these fragments represent? Which fragment did she paint first? Did she work in a particular direction? Alas, my grandmother passed away in 2019. I last saw her the summer before she passed, and she told us the story of the Tewa people that her mother had told her when she was a young girl. I used a recorder to document her storytelling, and I'm glad I did. I had planned on making a trip to see her and record some more stories, but I never made it. We forget about the impermanence of people. Storytelling and passing on those stories are so important. We need to take advantage of our relationships with our elders while they are here. In looking at this piece, I began to think of time spent with my grandmother when I was growing up. I remember a summer when we made pieces of pottery together. I was too young to realize how important that time was, our hands tending to the clay and the scent of wet earth. I have a memory of her hands covered in that light coating of dried clay. Now, when I see work by my grandmother Dextra, I start to look for clues that may connect to my own artistic practice. I have that recording that I would like to share with you all.
The side of that. Oh, I don't know how I ever got out of it. Well, I thought, well, Mom, I guess I'm not even going to see you no more, you know. Every time something happens, that was my word all the time. Mom, I guess I'll never see you again. And my mother was a beautiful lady. She was a nice-looking lady, tall, and she really kept herself nice, you know. And I remember my mom all the time. And now I even do that. I said, Mom, she always say, my daughter, I have this old antique dresser. I'm saving this for you. Now, I don't want you to ever forget that you were ugly or not pretty, because you were really a beautiful girl. And when this is an old antique, and I want to give this to you because I know how you feel about yourself. And I want you to remember that, what I tell you right now. And she just came right out and said, feel this, feel this. She had me feel that antique shells, you know, on that old antique dresser. It's got those old shells. These are from the sea where we came from. These are still on there. When you touch this, just tell me. Just say, Mom, I believe you. I am beautiful, huh? When you think of this, you just tell yourself that I'm still beautiful, and tell me that you're looking at me and you're still pretty, and you'll always be pretty. And this will tell you that that's right there. It's going to be there all the time. And you won't forget. And that's what I always do, you know. After that, I was always doing that. I feel my antique shells, and I feel them, and I feel so good, Oh, my mom is right here. Okay, Mom, I believe you, I believe you, and when I go, I'll you carry when you go from the water. So when you wear something around your neck, it has to be coral. And I was wondering about it, and then I said, well, how come and why coral? I said, because we're from the sea. We were away from the sea. And this is one of the things that we have to remember, that coral is very important. Every song that we have has that in there.
There you go.
And I don't want to forget that. When you feel that shell around that, just say, Mom, I know I'm still beautiful. And as soon as my mother answers me, that I'm still pretty, then I get real happy. And so it's just that, always remember when you have something, we all eat Paul, because we already have ear holes, Remember coral. Always remember coral. He young ho da e we di na po. He young ho I king emodi we handy o we ka. So that was also important to me, all the time. I said, well, I'll share this. He won't come. Don't be afraid to hold it back. Just tell them. And because if you don't, you're against it, against what you're hearing right now. But you can't hold that anymore because you're in command for that. Let them know. If they don't believe you, they'll sooner find out themselves. But this is one of the things I remember, I heard. So there I would, every morning I do that. I get up, first thing I do, I fill my dresser,
Yeah.
and I feel it, and I just kind of stand there and laugh, I say, okay, Mom, I hear you, I'm still beautiful, I said. And you were so beautiful yourself, I would just tell her, my mom,
Yeah.
She was beautiful, she was a beautiful lady. And I just have that doing all the time. Every day I do that. And so, and I know I'm supposed to let everybody know, the family and whoever, don't hold anything back. Because that's where we came from, the Tewas. That means where the water is.
Yeah.
Way, way deep. Wherever it is, it's just, just kind of let you know what to use or what it is. And it feels like I have that heaviness, I used to think, my goodness, I have to do that, but I have to, I was supposed to do that. I can't hold it. That's my responsibility in this world. So that's what I do every day.
Want me to spill that one out?
I'll
do it in the garbage.
So I don't hold it. I don't hold it to anybody.
Yeah.
I let whoever is supposed to know, I let them know. And it's kind of nice to be able to recognize a lot of things that way. And even with the boys, I do that. I let them know. Well, you're not. I know you have different things that you have to do. Do it. Don't hold it back.
Yeah.
So this is one of the things I know I have to do every day, every day, no matter who it is.
So after recording these stories and listening to her and thinking about my connection to my family and also their creating works using earth materials, I was commissioned by the Metropolitan Museum of Art to create a work for the Grounded in Clay exhibition when it moved to the Met. And so that was in June of this past year. But I had a good year and a half to plan it. And so I started to think of a way to incorporate my family's cultural heritage, artistic heritage as pottery makers into my own work as a photographer. And I really couldn't think of a way to do it other than incorporating sand into the technique in some way. And so I reached out to Luther Davis, who's a master printer at Powerhouse Arts in New York City. And Powerhouse has this little thing on their website where you can sign up and say, what is your project, and have a conversation with Luther Davis. And so I signed up for it, and I told him, I have this project. What do you think? Can we do this somehow? And he said, oh, absolutely. So he said, I'm going to be teaching a class up at the Anderson Ranch in Colorado. You're in New Mexico, right? I said, yeah. He said, well, if you want to drive up, we can work together for a week and see what we can do. So I drove up there and took some sand, and we did some screen print tests of one of the black place pieces and incorporated sand into it by using kind of a glue to print the image and then apply sand to it and then shake off the excess sand, and what was left was this photographic image composed of sand. So this image that you're looking at here is actually kind of cool for a little piece of history. It's the first time in the Met's 153rd Unity curated exhibition. And so during the week of install for the exhibit, having lived in New York City for a long time, I never quite knew how they did that, so it was kind of cool to see. So this is the piece that I created for the Met. It is a screen print on shape panel with hand-applied sand. It's 6 feet long, and it incorporates, it's of Fajada Butte out at Chaco Canyon, and it is fluorescent pink, the methane gas cloud that sits over that region. When we were color mixing for the inks we used, we were able to add fluorescence, which I had never been able to do in my work before. And when I was working on the piece at Powerhouse, Powerhouse Arts was able to kind of follow me around during the week and record my process, which a lot of people, I often get asked, like, how did you make this? So this video I'm going to show you is how I create my silk screened works. I want to thank Sam Pulser at Powerhouse because he did such a great job on this video. Hi, I'm Michael Namingha. I am an artist, photographer, now screen printer. Given my family's history with pottery making, I have been trying to think of a way to merge the two and to bring those two art forms together. For my work, I chose to do a silkscreen process rather than a straight-on photography process because I wanted to layer the piece with different inks, but more importantly, I've gathered sand from Santa Fe, New Mexico, whose Tewa name is Oge Oge, which translates to white shell water place. And for the Met piece, I wanted to use soil that was representative of where my people come from. Given my family's artistic heritage as pottery makers, and they gathered their clay from the earth and from a specific spot for decades. Last summer, I was also working with Luther up at the Anderson Ranch in Colorado. I had thrown this idea out to him and I said, I've been wanting to incorporate sand into my technique somehow. Is there a way that we can accomplish this task? And so we did some experiments and that's when it just clicked. I'm pretty new to this. I did silk screening, I don't know, like 25 years ago. And so working with a team like this that know exactly what they're doing, and even the color mixing process with Nellie has been great to be part of. And so there's all sorts of different levels because each person here seems to have knowledge of a specific area and they can bring that knowledge to whatever I'm working on, and separate conversations lead to maybe how I'm thinking or looking at something differently, and they may see something else that I don't see. Being in this space and also working with a team of 5 people for at least a week's time is really eye-opening. I mean, I go home at night and I'm like, oh my God, I can't wait to go back to the studio. So that brings me to my time here at SAR. I thought that, being knee-deep in the project for Grounded in Clay really lended itself well to doing research on the collection here of Nampeyo pottery designs. And so during my time here, I've been spending about every 2 weeks in the vaults with Nampeyo pieces, pieces by her daughter Annie, and then her daughter Rachel, and then my grandmother Dextra, and photographing those pottery patterns and designs. And I also realized that 3 months at a fellowship is not long enough. So I really have only begun to really, I feel, scratch the surface of what I really want to accomplish. So this project, I think, is probably going to end up being about a year or 2 long. So I photographed many of her works, and I'm so drawn to, I feel like Nampeyo was a modernist before the modernists. And you look at her design patterns, and they are just so incredible and inspiring to me. But I'm also, especially in this piece, looking at shapes and patterns in my own work and how I'm looking at things. And so my intent over the next year is to also go out to Hopi and to interview some of my family members that are still pottery makers and talk to them about some of these works and how they interpret them, how their designs have changed over the years, if they were inspired by some of these pottery designs that Nampeyo did. And also I had my dad in the vaults a couple weeks ago. And so that was also a very eye-opening experience because he would often comment about the works and would tell a story about remembering when the certain piece was even made. And so to have that connection right next to you is so important. And so my next intention is also to invite my brother to go through these with me, because at one point my brother was also set with the task by my grandmother to kind of not reinterpret, but take the Nampeyo pottery designs that were put down on paper and copy them and kind of to make them so that they were more ready for today's world. So that experience alone, I think, is so valuable. And so this is a photograph of me on one of my very intense relationships with these pottery pieces. And what also has happened is I've been talking to other institutions that have Nampeyo pieces in their collections, and they've invited me as well to look at some of their works in their museums and also to document some of that. So overall, there's a lot more work to do for me, and I'm just incredibly thankful for my time here at SAR. And we're coming up on 40 minutes, so I just want to cut it there. But if there are any questions from the audience, I'm free to answer them. Yes?
Sure. 1 second, Donna, I'm going to bring you a microphone so that everybody at home can hear you.
How old was his grandma when she made that pot?
The one that I chose for Grounded in Clay, it was in 1980. So she was 50. I'm looking at my dad.
She passed away in 2019. So, 4 years. Yeah, close to 4 years. In 1980, I was...
You were 30.
I was 30 years old. In 1980, I was 30. So actually, I was born in 1950. So my mother was, I believe, around 21 or 22 years old at the time. So you kind of figure out the numbers there.
Thank you. You didn't expect you'd have to be doing quick math. Any other questions?
Where is the Antica?
Where is the
Antica, where is it?
Antica? What is
She
Antica?
talks about it.
Oh, her dresser. She was like, I wouldn't say a hoarder, but she loved she loved her antiques. So my aunt, Camille, lives in my grandmother's home, and so it's probably still there, I hope.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, she sometimes traded for antiques whenever she completed a pot. And she loved going into antique shops and buying furniture, mirrors and things like that. But what she was talking about also in the recording, when she would wake up in the morning and touch her antique dresser, she would tell me, she says, "Oh, thank God I'm still alive." And so as she was getting older, she would do that also.
Have any other questions?
Michael, thank you so much for your great work and many, many accomplishments for New Mexico. We have a great audience here. Is there any call to action that you'd like to suggest amongst other people from your artwork, or just for those of us who are here who care about what you're doing?
Yeah, I think, thanks, Drew. Nice to see you. A lot of times, people in this area are kind of familiar with what's happening environmentally, but when the work does travel to the East Coast, to the West Coast, or right now I have part of an exhibit at the Max Ernst Museum in Germany. It's really, I like my work to sort of be a call to action, and thinking of ways that people, after they see it, after they engage with it, after they read about it, what ways they can get involved with their own local communities or our community. Because I think our planet as a whole is in deep trouble, and it's not just in one area, it's globally.
Any other questions from the audience? I have a quick question for you, Michael. I know that that your project has evolved from its sort of your initial proposal. Can you talk a little bit about how that's evolved?
Yeah, so when on the application, I was so excited. I was like, yes, I'm gonna have all this done in 3 months. And I arrived here and I was like, what am I gonna do for the rest of the 3 months? I basically took that and threw it out the window, because my first visit to the vault, I said, this is so much bigger than I thought. And there's a much larger story here. And I think I had come into this with, I had taken photographs of a Namingha piece that is in my own collection, that is of a Chaco doorway. It was done in 1906, and it's a very abstract kind of modernist piece. And I kind of gave it the, what I do with my own work, I kind of dissected it and reconstructed it with plans to print it and to create an artwork out of it. But after being with the pieces here, I was like, I can't do that. There's something else here. There's something much more deeper than just looking at something and taking a photograph and reinterpreting it. I need much more of the backstory that goes with it. And so it's really become this discovery for me. And I definitely know I'm not finished, far from it.
Yeah. And one more thing that I thought was sort of cool, so I thought maybe you'd want to share it. We did a reel, Instagram reel with Michael the other day, and I don't know if any of you saw it, but you should check it out. But he did mention something about discovering something about Namingha's process, and I wonder if you would share that.
Yeah, so working with Luther at Powerhouse, we were trying to figure out maybe, because the piece at the Met, the sand, it's fine, but it's not super fine. And I think a way to have it be a little bit more pliable is to pulverize the sand. And so I told Luther, how can we pulverize the sand? And Luther he's so funny, he's so cool. He sent me an image of a recycling machine where you put glass in and it pulverizes it. And he said, we need to get one of these, but I don't know where to get it. And I said, well, I think we could think of another way to do it. But I discovered that because I was reading about Namingha and her process, and she would pulverize her sand. And she used a metate to do that. And I thought, oh my God, there's my answer. There's my material that I can, because I think when I'm gathering the sand, it is such a personal experience. It's like, do you want me to videotape you? Do you want me to photograph you during that process? And I said, no. And I think this is yet another step in that process of developing these works, but also looking as far back as Namingha and incorporating that again into my own process.
That's such a cool discovery. Are there any other questions from the audience? Daniel, are there any from the chat? No? Okay, I have just one more that, just out of curiosity. I'm so interested in your incorporation of all these different colors into your work, and I'm wondering, are there plans for that for this current process, sort of in the way that you would use the pink for the methane cloud or the red? Or
yeah, I'm going, when this is over on the 30th, I leave to New York on the 2nd to work at Powerhouse doing some new pieces, and it's kind of continuing the piece that's at the Met and that series. So it will incorporate either red, yellow, or orange into the works. But kind of going back, I was at the Santa Fe Art Institute when I was in high school. They used to invite artists to the Art Institute to teach like a week or 2 week long courses. I signed up for quite a few of them, from Fritz Scholder to Judy Pfaff, Manuel Neri. But one of them was with John Baldessari, and since I was the youngest in the class, everyone was like in their 40s, 50s, 60s. I was so proud of myself. I had painted this board red, and then I had collaged these photo images of Dalmatians on top of it. And that was my work for the art critique. And so I put it up on the board, and I was so excited. And he said, yeah, well, this is interesting, I guess. And he said, why did you choose red? I said, oh, I don't know. I like the color red. It's pretty. And he said, that's bullshit. You should always have a purpose for the colors you choose. And so that has actually stuck with me. And so every time I incorporate any color into my work, I feel like there has to be some sort of purpose or story behind it. So thanks, John Baldessari.
All right. Well, one last call for questions? No? Okay. Well, we can head on over. Everyone's welcome to join us to the Dubin Studio, and I know Michael has a couple of examples of his previous work up. We have some snacks, so come on over.
Thanks.